Welcome back, and indeed, thank you very much for staying tuned to KBC Channel 1. Now, before we went on the break, I did mention to you, we did run the story of South Sudan, the leaders there signing a peace deal that will see a ceasefire in 24 hours and a total, opening up of humanitarian help within the country. And of course, the country has suffered quite a lot. People have been misplaced and lots of others have died. And of course, this is a crisis, not just in the country, but in the neighboring countries where these people are running to. And so tonight we're joined in studio by two guests. One is the country representative for the United Nations Population Fund, Mr. Sid Chatterjee. Allow me to call you Sid. You did say that I could call you Sid, as well as Barnabas Issa, who is the Director for South Sudan, the United Nations Population Fund. Karibuni sana, welcome to the program. 5 months down the line, let me begin with you, Mr. Issa. 5 months down the line, lots of people have been misplaced, others have died. What is that situation like in South Sudan?
Well, quite a number of people have been displaced, and the estimate now is about over 1 million people have been displaced. Out of which you have almost 950-something thousand in South Sudan itself. And outside South Sudan into the neighboring countries of Uganda, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Sudan, you have over 300,000 people that have been displaced as a result of the conflict that started in December last year.
Out of a total population of about 10.8 million people? Well,
at the moment, the estimate ranges between 10 to 12 million people.
And these people mostly are running off to countries, their neighboring countries, Kenya being one of them?
Yes, they have run for shelter in Kenya, and as I said, Uganda, Ethiopia, and Sudan, because of the fighting that took place in different parts of the country since December.
Of course. Let's move over now to you, Mr. Chatterjee. What are we as Kenyans doing to salvage the situation? I know many of them are running into Kenya and running into Kakuma. What is that situation like for us as a country?
Well, perhaps at the outset, a tribute to the government of Kenya for having been so generous for so many years to accepting refugees from various conflict-affected parts of Eastern and Southern Africa. And I think President Kenyatta deserves great credit, along with the presidents of the regional countries who've helped broker this peace deal. The most important thing is that peace deal should stand. Clearly in Kakuma, we have approximately about 170,000 refugees which have been there for the last several years. But since December 2013, we've had refugees from South Sudan who've come into Kakuma, approximately 35 to 40,000 of them. So UNFPA, the UNFPA Kenya country office, is really focusing its attention on ensuring that the maternal health services, which are critical, are being provided there. They are training caregivers, they are training midwives, they are training and providing support for antenatal care for all the women that have arrived there. Besides this is the biggest tragedy, and that big tragedy which has unraveled because of this conflict in South Sudan has been sexual and gender-based violence. It is unimaginable. And clearly, a message from our Executive Director of the United Nations Population Fund, Dr. Babatunde Oshodimon, is clear. He has called upon all the country offices to ensure the protection, the well-being, the care of these pregnant and lactating women, to look after them, to provide them with the services that are necessary, not just for their survival, because their survival and well-being mean proper, the survival of their children too. So that is a major priority for us. But the scourge of sexual violence is what is causing us grave concern. And these are women who are being psychologically scarred over a period of time. They need psychosocial support. They need the treatment, not just the physical treatment, the emotional and the psychological treatment. And that is why the regional director of the Eastern and Southern Africa region, Dr. Julita Onabanjo, who you just saw a little earlier on the television, is absolutely clear. She wants every support to be given to these women who are so fragile, so intimidated, displaced by the circumstances that they are coming from.
All right, let me just stop you there for a little bit and ask you this. In in wars, we've seen it across the continent, really. Most of the people who are affected are women and children. And most of the problems that they come up with, rather, most of the things that mostly affect them are gender-based violence in the sense of raping and, of course, sexual abuse. Is that what is happening with this case in South Sudan? Is that the most prevalent issue that we're seeing coming out of South Sudan for women and children?
Unfortunately, the reality of this is not, South Sudan is not an exception. In fact, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, we've seen it in neighboring countries, and it's not just in Africa, it's a scourge that is prevalent perhaps throughout the world. And I think this is the time for the international community to really stand up and say enough is enough. And I think there have been several initiatives that have been taken to put an end to this.
So what is being done to these women and children who are coming in from South Sudan, coming into our country with such a heavy heart, with these problems burdening them? What is being done for
This
them?
is precisely why UNFPA has got together as a region and putting its resources together, its intellectual capital, its financial capital, its human resources, to try and see what we can do to ramp up the existing humanitarian response that we are delivering for these vulnerable women and children. But most importantly, what we are trying to do is ensure that no woman, no child remains ignored in this particular situation. And that is why we've, thanks to the generosity of Norway, that we are seeing this pledging conference, which is taking place on the 20th of May, which is very important.
All right, we'll come to that a little later on because we still need to discuss that $25 million that you are seeking for. But Mr. Yi says this is the situation down in South Sudan as well. What is happening with the women and the children who are being left behind there?
Okay, what Sid said now is very true of South Sudan itself, because these people are coming from South Sudan. And therefore, you should know that once people are displaced, and as many as I said, almost over 1 million people are displaced, and these people start running for shelter, either in the UN protection, civilian protection places, or even in the open places, as long as they have run away from their homes, basically you find that they are open to all sorts of abuses, and they become extremely vulnerable, and this is happening in South Sudan. As a matter of fact, in heavily contested areas, we have witnessed that this has happened in quite a number of places.
What is being done to help and aid these women and children down in South Sudan?
Now, in the case of South Sudan, what UNFPA and partners are doing is to come together, provide psychosocial services, provide preventive services, as well as clinical services of those who have been affected. And this is being done in almost all major camps that are in South Sudan. And the intention is to scale up very fast so that we reach as many women as possible to prevent gender-based violence in the camps that are in South Sudan itself.
All right, let me ask you this. About approximately 4.2 million people in the country right now are facing hunger and starvation. Right. What is going to be done to those 4.2 million people? Quite a good number of them.
I think the good news is what happened is happening this weekend. The fact that IGAD and the international community have been able to bring the president and the former vice president together to sign a peace agreement, which all along the United Nations have been saying there should be a time of tranquility for farmers to be able to plant their seeds, those who are tending to animals to be able to tend to their animals, and indeed, even those who are working on fisheries should continue to work on their fishery projects. It's a very good news because in the next 1 month or so, you'll find that farmers will be able to plant a lot of their crops wherever they are, and then the United Nations will also be able to provide them with assistance in terms of equipment, in terms of seeds that they will be able to plant. If that goes well, then the famine will be prevented. But if it doesn't go well, it means that South Sudan will not be able to produce enough food to feed itself. Mm-hmm. And we are now looking ahead in terms of the next dry season. Because if this rainy season, the farmers are not allowed or could not have chance to tend to their activities as is expected, then there will be serious shortage of food for almost 4.2 million people.
As the Kenyan counterpart, are we doing anything to alleviate that problem?
Well, for the time being, what we are doing is focusing on the refugees that are coming to Kakuma. I just hope there are no more refugees that come there and that situation stabilizes quickly so that the existing refugees can gradually start going home. The problem is if the fighting restarts again, then you will see a sudden influx that will take place into Kenya. So that would present many, many challenges. My country office, the United Nations Population Fund for Kenya, since December 2013, has invested close to $850,000, particularly to focus on these refugees that have come across and focusing on the areas that I mentioned. But in addition to that, providing reproductive health commodities such as condoms, so that we prevent sexually transmitted diseases, HIV and AIDS, and reproductive health care kits. But essentially, what is needed is their care, is their well-being, and is their protection. And those are the marching orders that has been given by the Executive Director of UNFPA, Dr. Babatunde Osotaiman. And this is the clarion call that the United Nations Population Fund has had in the region too.
All right, you said something interesting there that I was able to pick out, that we might see a situation that if the fighting in South Sudan continues or it escalates, we're going to see an influx of refugees, more refugees coming into the country. But let me ask you this, is there a plan to send them back home as it stands right now? Because if the country really attains peace, is there a plan to send them back home?
Psychologically, that's, the United Nations Organization for Refugees, the High Commission for Refugees, would certainly be kind of keeping a tab on this. In fact, they're totally operational as well in Kakuma. The most important thing is that once there is stability, I don't think any human being wants to be displaced from their home and the surrounding that they belong to. And that's the same case for South Sudan. So when they see the situation normalizes, they would want to go back to their respective homes. And I think if this peace deal holds, I think we all have to hope for it and make every effort to make the youngest nation in the world survive, and not just survive, but thrive too.
All right. So you're seeking for, the United Nations Population Fund is seeking for $25 million to help in the humanitarian operations in South Sudan. Talk to us a little bit about that.
In South Sudan and the 4 neighboring countries. Okay. So it includes Ethiopia, Sudan, Uganda, and Kenya. And clearly, as my colleague Barnabas mentioned, the larger chunk of the money is really going into 17 million is going into the efforts that is being made in South Sudan itself, and we will be kind of supporting him with all the refugees that are coming across. Our most important, that is why we are quite happy with this initiative that the Norwegian government has taken with this pledging conference to which we are going to, and we are confident that together with the other members of the UN family, the civil society, the Red Cross movement, we should be able to make a massive difference in terms of improving the lives of these people. Because what we are now doing right now is to save their lives, but then we quickly need to move on to the relief and development phase. What
is the feeling you're getting out of the conference this far? Do you feel as if you're going to attain that goal of $25 million?
Well, I'm quite confident. I think the fact that there has been this big, clarion call made by the government of Norway, which has always stood up when there have been difficult times anywhere in the world. So I think it's a good opportunity, and there are many other donors. I know, be it the British, the Japanese, many non-traditional donors, the Middle Eastern countries, the Gulf cooperation countries, who really come forward and stepped up to the plate. I think we are quite confident as the United Nations Population Fund that we will see the resources come in, because it's not just, it's now to bring back a sense of normalcy into this last few months of total devastation that South Sudan has experienced. And keep in mind that these are people that are tired and just miserable for close to 25 years of conflict before that. So, it's just been an unending saga of misery for them. I think this is a good time for us to make every effort to make sure that there is an opportunity and hope. And that's what United Nations Population Fund epitomizes, is to give them that iota of hope.
Surely. And Mr. Issa, if I may ask you, could you kindly just roughly perhaps give us a breakdown of what that money will do? Well, roughly.
Okay, the money basically will go into providing reproductive health kits, and we have different type of kits. We have it from kit 1 to kit 13, which include delivery kits, what we also call dignity kits, as well as, like he has said, condoms to prevent HIV and other sexually transmitted diseases. Also, the money will be used for training of people who will now be using these kits And at the moment in South Sudan, the United Nations Population Fund has deployed a number of midwives in the various locations who are providing services. So part of this money will go into ensuring that these people provide quality services to women who have been displaced and are at the moment pregnant or lactating or who are to give birth. Also, the approach is that we should ensure that every woman that is pregnant has the opportunity to receive antenatal care, safe delivery, and postnatal care. And the children they are giving birth to come out live and sound in these various camps that we have in South Sudan. This is being done with quite a number of partners. It's not only United Nations Population Fund. We have other partners that are also working in this area. So this is a push by the various partners in South Sudan and trying to do everything possible to support South Sudanese. But those South Sudanese that are outside South Sudanese and have become seeking shelter in other countries like you have in Kenya here, then the country office in such countries are trying to see what they can do. And this is where IGAD becomes critically important. And what the presidents of IGAD countries are doing is not just stop from the peace talks, but it should go to the extent of looking after those who have been displaced and they are in these countries with all these services that we are talking about, particularly for women. Without women, what is the future of a country? A country will have no future if there are no women. And we want to make sure that South Sudan, as the youngest country in the world, their women enjoy what other women in other parts of the world are enjoying.
All right, and then finally, Mr. Chatterjee, if you could just speak to the people, to the South Sudanese people in Kakuma refugee camp right now, what would you tell them?
I would say that you can count on the support and assistance of the United Nations Population Fund. I would tell them that that we are completely committed to their well-being. And what we do want to do is to look at the entire Eastern and Southern Africa region as a whole. We are soon coming to the end of the Millennium Development Goals of 2015. If there is one part of the report card that still needs to be improved quite dramatically, is the MDG Goal 5, which is about improvement or reduction of maternal mortality. Perhaps this is a good opportune time for us to be able to galvanize those resources to be able to make a big difference to these people there.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you for coming into the program and giving us insights on the humanitarian crisis down in South Sudan. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much
for
coming. Well, we have been talking to two representatives from